she literally has multiple streams of incomes through every single one of her daughters, right? And son, I guess, if the sock line is doing anything. Hey, shout out Arthur George. Hello, welcome to Culture Feeds. I'm your host, Yaparoni. Thanks so much for joining me today. It's been a while, you guys. Thank you guys so much for coming back and hanging out with me. I was supposed to originally only take 2 weeks off, and then I just took off a month because I just had a lot of life updates. I got a new job. I moved into a new apartment with my mom. So there's just a lot of things to adjust to. And this was all sort of happening right as I was starting the podcast. And I had gotten a month in, and then I was like, you know what? I need to kind of reevaluate how I want to move forward, just because I do want to be really consistent with this podcast. But when it came to the research process, as well as the recording process and the editing process, I was just not doing things in the most sustainable and efficient way. So I just took this month to really prep the podcast a little bit more, because in the beginning of the podcast I was like, okay, I just need to like get consistent. Like I just need to start doing it because I can't keep pushing this off. And so I was getting into the groove of things, but I was also thinking like I want to do more thorough research on this. I want to do deeper analysis, and I need to be more intentional with how I approach the episodes. So that's kind of what I've been working on for the past month. So I'm excited to be back. In this episode, we are going to be talking about deconstructing the stage parent. Now, this is an episode that I've really been thinking about because I love digging into any celebrity's lore. Okay. Like, I just love a good backstory. I love learning people's childhoods, how they get to a certain point in their career, things like that. So, the stage parent is a trope that I see very consistently, very often. And I kind of wanted to try my own analysis on this trope that we see so often in the entertainment industry. So, over the past several decades, we've seen a multitude of versions of the stage parent. I would say it looks different even in each sub industry. Like when you look at reality TV versus sports versus music versus acting, like they all look a little different, but their behaviors all also have very similar traits. So if you're interested in pop culture, celebrity lore, it's a trope that we continue to see over and over. And one of the biggest issues that I have when it comes to this conversation is that a lot of people will almost excuse various forms of abuse that we're witnessing as the audience, and we almost condone it or excuse it, thinking that it was a necessary ingredient or experience that the child star had to go through in order to produce legendary talent and success. Now, this conversation honestly drives me up the wall sometimes because there are just so many ways that we can really debunk this argument. It's just such a fallacy, and I think it's dangerous and it's really harmful. So, my argument is that I absolutely do not believe that abuse or controlling parents should be attributed to an artist's success. I think it not only enables the abuse itself, but it absolves the exploitative and predatory nature of the entertainment industry as a whole. And it deters us away from having important conversations about how the industry will often prey on children who have parents like this. But I also think this topic deserves nuance and more thought out conversations because it's also not as black and white as most people may perceive it as. So, we're going to look at a couple different case studies throughout this episode today. And I think each individual case gives us important points to look at and details that will leave us with a lot to think about. First, what is a stage parent? Let's think about that. Just to generally define the stage parent archetype, it's a parent who aggressively manages, controls, and or financially benefits from their child's performance career, often blurring the lines among being a figure of authority, support, and or exploitation. An important note I think we need to start off with is that there's a spectrum of stage parents in a similar way where there's a spectrum of abuse. Like not all stage parents are inherently abusive, but also like you can be abusive without being negligent. You can be, I mean, actually, I don't know if I believe that. I think abuse and negligence actually comes hand in hand, even if your parents are extremely controlling and obsessive. There's always going to be something that they're being negligent on when they are hyper fixated on having certain amounts of control in certain in specific aspects of a child's life. But I do think the spectrum ranges. It can go from being aggressively ambitious and pushing your child to their absolute limits, to being carelessly neglectful, letting their kids just being exploited left and right without any care for their safety. Maybe spectrum isn't the right word, but I think it's like almost a circle. When we think of a spectrum, we think of it as like a range, like a line, but it's more like a cyclical spectrum. So I would say some similarities that I've seen, not just in terms of the parenting approach or style, is that a lot of these stage parents were also entertainers themselves at one point. There's this desire to live vicariously through their child. Maybe they had aspirations to become a dancer or an actor or a singer, and they just didn't end up in the right point of their career. So they push that dream onto their children and they want to see them succeed so that it could be a direct reflection of them. A lot of stage parents also come from poor, lower income backgrounds. So putting their children to work is kind of the only option that they have. And once they find out that it's lucrative, they have their child become the primary breadwinner. And that's also a lot of different stories that we've heard throughout the past. And I also think having children starting to work at a very young age is almost gives the parents an opportunity to become free of accountability when it comes to their parental responsibilities. So once you have the expectation that the child has to work like an adult, basically, they're given certain responsibilities that now the parent doesn't have to worry about as much, even though it should still be their responsibility because they're a child at the end of the day. It should still be the parent's responsibility. But once they start working, the expectations are kind of changing. I would say the industry sometimes encourages the parents to let the kids do things that normal children wouldn't shouldn't be allowed to do, such as like skipping school for a gig or something like that. And usually it's up to the parents to create those boundaries so that a child can have a balanced childhood, but not all parents will do that. Once they see a bag, as long as it's making money, then that's the top priority. All right. So, my argument is that abuse does not create legends. Abuse does not create talent. We can look at a couple points to argue that. And the first one I want to talk about is survivor bias. So I just think that there are way too many damn cases of children with abusive parents and experiences of trauma and abuse who did not find success in the industry in the same way that some outliers may have. And you can see the range of parenting styles that's a lot of stars grew up with. There are plenty of stars with supportive parents that were able to thrive creatively, which we will talk about. And there are also parents that had abusive parenting style and ended up having a really tragic life by the end of it. I think Judy Garland right here is a really prominent example. She was such a great star. She's one of the first recorded cases of having a stage parent, I would say. I am honestly not too familiar with Judy Garland's background that much. I didn't really grow up with her work except for Wizard of Oz, but I was reading up on her background a little bit for this episode, and it is so insane what her parents and the studios, MGM, like put her through just so that she can keep working. And she also ended up having a very short life. And so we can look at her and be like, yeah, abuse does not create legends, because think about all of the opportunities that she didn't have later in her life because she passed away. And she had such a like just any everything about her personal life seemed so dysfunctional. And even the way that they would prescribe her pills to go to sleep, and then prescribe her more pills to get up in the morning, and then when she was mentally having a breakdown, they didn't even give her any mental health resources because they thought it would look bad for the studio reputation. Like, it's just it's just ridiculous to me. And obviously, this is a case that was almost 100 years ago at this point, but like, it makes me sad to say I don't know if things have changed that much. Like, truly, of course, there's not like studio doctors prescribing pills to these to stars in the same way that Judy Garland had experienced, but I mean, there's things that are not too far off, you know what I mean? Also, I guess just echoing my point that I said before, the public often does not see how abusive parents restrict their children from reaching their full potential. So, like I said, there was so much potential for Judy Garland in for the remainder of her life, and we will never know what that would entail. And being someone that has actually had experience working in the entertainment industry, I don't think people realize how much we don't see. Like, we really, these people are public figures, but that does not mean their whole life is public. Like, it's actually pretty crazy how the public will create certain narratives that are just not based in reality at all, because we really don't see as much as we think we do. And it's very interesting, and I think people don't realize how much certain parenting styles in the industry where there's so much restriction and so much control that's at play there. It also makes me think about how much art and greatness that we're not given access to simply because of egos that are working behind the scenes. Like, this is kind of unrelated to the stage parent aspect of it, but think about when women speaking out during the Me Too movement, right? A lot of women were speaking about how they weren't willing to give it up for a certain network executive, or they weren't willing to be complicit in certain things that were required of them, and opportunities were instantly taken away from them. And we don't know what that could have done for their careers. We don't know what that could have done for just the industry as a whole in terms of cultural impact. Like, I think about that all the time, and it just makes me really sad. And I think that could be applied to stage parents too. Like, if stage parents could just give a little bit more autonomy and freedom, but also give more protection and boundaries to their children, what could they really become? How could they really thrive compared to just being absolutely exploited in very unethical ways? The second point I would say is the tortured artist stereotype. Kanye West, Lennon, and Amy Winehouse. We're not talking about them specifically in this episode. I just think they're good examples of tortured artists. I think there's just reason for a lot of people to think that a human struggle provides deeper insight and emotion that is expressed in one's art. I think artists obviously have to be very sensitive to their emotions and understand how to frame their experiences in order to reflect that directly into their art. This whole tortured artists, like, they're always going through some crazy shit so that they can make good art, and I just don't believe that that's true. Like, I think artists can go through great life experiences and euphoric life experiences to also reflect their art. I don't think it has to be so always rooted in some type of trauma or abuse or oppression, because really the skill that artists have is through their storytelling. It's through how they show their experiences through their own lens. It's not necessarily about the experience itself, because anyone can really experience a certain trauma, a certain oppression, a certain abuse, certain human interactions, and it's it's really about how the artist frames their life or other people's stories as well. It's not like an artist's work is always directly reflective of their actual experiences. It could very much be framed in the perspective of someone else. Especially with artists, because they function in a way where they must tap into their own world in order to create something that resonates with people. There is also this type of glamorization of the tortured artist trope, because we assume that trauma automatically equals some type of authenticity or depth. And while that could be the case, I don't think there's always a correlation. I think there are plenty of artists that have gone through crazy traumatic shit and their art is still bad. And I'm sure you can think of one too. And I think this assumption is also often weaponized by the industry itself to almost retrospectively justify institutional abuse or neglect that is happening. I think if we just put the blame on, oh, that's just how artists are, there's nothing to actually look back and reflect. It allows the industry to get away with those things. And I don't think that's okay. A little bit more to the tortured artist stereotype, I want to also ask this question, especially when it comes to the pop or blockbuster industries. If we assume that trauma equals authenticity or depth, right? Is authenticity and creative expression or depth truly valued? If we really think about it, like, is the pop machine, is the blockbuster machine truly prioritizing creative expression, true authenticity? No. They always prioritize what makes the most money. And that's also often the stage parents' first priority too. Like, their priorities are in reality very much aligned, and that is why stage parents and children with certain stage parents that are neglectful and abusive and complicit will be preyed upon. I think there are specific artists, performers, entertainers that are cherry picked in the industry because they're easy to manipulate, because they're easy to exploit. And the industry will give that entity, it's not even the performer or the artist itself, it's the entity, the business behind them. They will give them all the resources so that they could be exploited as much as possible for as much money as possible. I just think that abuse creating genius is such a harmful argument to make because it doesn't encourage people to look at how stage parents and the industry are morally aligned. I think there's just too many stories in which artists are exploited as products where their creative agency is disregarded for the sake of executive profit. And it also functions similarly when it comes to child star and stage parent dynamics as well. Like, they don't care about protecting their children, they would rather make more money at the end. And then the next point I want to make is like the generational change that's been sort of going on. I think the stage parent is looked at differently compared to previous generations. I think the sentiment of respecting your elders, your parents always know best, they've gone through so much, is starting to become a little outdated, especially with the newer generations like millennials and Gen Z. I think we're kind of the first generations. I think it's been researched that we're the first generation to not do better than our parents. We're worse off than our parents. So we're kind of in this weird state where we're kind of like, well, the older generation didn't set us up for shit, so what do they really know? And that's not to say that to not listen to your parents and your parents are stupid or whatever. That's not true at all. I think there was also this overall expectation to empathize with your parents where they're doing this for you, they're doing this for your sake, they want you to succeed, and that's why they're doing it. But now we're kind of in the age of, but what does the child want? Like, you're saying you're doing it for them, but why aren't you thinking about what they want? That kind of perspective. And I think that's one of the things that I really appreciate about my generation, that we no longer like glamorize this type of parenting. We don't see like a huge star with their parents and think like, oh my God, like their parents set them up for success. It's rather like, oh, I hope that those parents are protecting them. De-romanticizing the idea of your parents always knowing best, especially with such a predatory industry. Like, I feel like when it comes to stage parents, a lot of them really go into it not knowing how salacious and predatory the industry really is. And I think that is something that more parents need to know about when setting their kids up to enter an industry like this. Back in the day, it was more accepted for a stage parent to openly be like, yeah, I had no idea how this industry worked. Like, I was just trying to see and give my kids opportunities or whatever. But it's like, no, now you need to understand that you need to protect your children if you're going to let them enter this industry. And I think that's becoming more of the norm. And I think that's really good. I think those are the main points. Obviously, again, corporate power. I think the industry is able to sniff out certain child stars and certain people who have abusive and neglected parents that will allow them to be exploited. Sometimes certain stars are propped up based on how much their parents will allow their children to be exploited. And I think Aaron Carter, Justin Bieber, and Lindsay Lohan are some of the most prominent examples. They don't necessarily have stage parents. It's more so they don't create any boundaries for the sake of their children, their parents. So then the team around them, knowing how successful they are, will be the ones to just let them go. And their parents don't do anything about it because they know that it'll end up making them a lot of money. And I think specifically the industry will sniff out kids who have parents like this who don't have boundaries, who don't know how to create boundaries for their children so that they could just be exploited to the nth degree. The industry can keep doing it and their parents won't protect them. And then I guess the last major point I want to make is that making a legend is never linear. I think every star icon legend goes through different ebbs and flows throughout their career, and every path to creating your own legacy is going to look different. And I think that's why each respective legend is a legend, because they all have created their own path. I think it's very one dimensional to say that these parents are the ones that created the legend or the genius or the it factor in all of these stars, right? So we're going to be looking at, yeah, we're going to do like 4 case studies, okay? And the first one I want to do is Michael Jackson and Joe Jackson. Now, I watched the Michael biopic I believe last week, and I've also just had like a major hyperfixation on Michael Jackson kind of like my whole life because his life is so interesting. I think he is like one of the quintessential like pop stars where they kind of become a circus animal almost. Their entire life becomes a spectacle, and their careers, there's just so much to dissect about their careers. At least for the Michael biopic, I do think, in my personal opinion, I thought the Michael biopic was a little bit one dimensional. I think there was a lot more complex issues that they really could have dived into in the movie that they chose not to, which also fair. It's like a very polished look at Michael Jackson's life. But I think Michael Jackson and the way he would talk about his relationship to his father, Joe Jackson, is one of the quintessential case studies to look at when looking at a stage parent. The abuse that Michael had faced at the hands of his father has been well documented throughout his career, and Joe has never really shown any remorse for the destructive role he played in Michael Jackson's life. He was quoted saying, I believe with Pierce Morgan, after Michael had died, he said, I'm glad I was tough because look what I came out with. He directly perpetuates the myth that his abusive parenting was the reason for his children's success. And when I was watching previous interviews of Joe Jackson, he really does not seem to give a fuck. Like, he really does not seem to have any type of remorse for the way he treated his children. I can understand why that is. I think there's, when it comes to looking at the older generation, specifically the Black community in rural areas like Indiana, where Michael Jackson and his family is from, they faced a lot of racism. And like, obviously, I can't speak to that experience, but when families during that time like were not financially set up for success, they were very much more in danger to be susceptible to other dangerous things. So I think Joe Jackson's approach was sort of like, this is the only way that I can guarantee my children's safety in a lot of way. Like, I feel like that's kind of maybe the perspective that he's coming from, not to justify anything, but I think when it comes to that perspective of the older generation, given the context, and I think a lot of the Jackson children, like as they've gotten older, have said like they understand where, like, why their father was the way that he was. And I think that just kind of happens with all children when they grow up, like not to justify, but just more explain. And this is never to try and undermine the actual abuse that people face. I think it's just important to think about why people become abusers and how they were also possibly abused. And that's how the cycle continues on. And especially like the time period and the context in which you yourself was raised and disciplined can reflect how you move as a parent. Like, I'm sure Joe Jackson also experienced a lot of abuse as a child, and that has also influenced the way he parented his children. It's very much a cycle, you know? And again, it should never be condoned, but corporal punishment was often normalized back in the day. And I was going through some Reddit threads about Michael Jackson's childhood, and it seemed that a lot of black families understood like the family dynamics of the Jacksons, but then when white people were learning about Jackson's background, they were like, "Oh my god, like he was abused, like all this." It's like a kind of like a culture shock, but it makes sense when like marginalized communities who directly experience symptoms of capitalism and oppression, in which there's just less room to parent in healthy ways. And it's not just to say that this was a different time and people thought it was okay, but more so there were just less resources available for people to navigate these experiences in a way that they can actually cope in a healthy way and understand what's happening to them. So I think that's something to really think about, not just in the case of Michael Jackson and Joe Jackson, but all of them. It helps you understand better why these dynamics turn out this way. So, I think Michael Jackson is a great example of why abuse does not create genius, because I would say I think it's very obvious to see that the most commercially successful years of Michael Jackson's career started to really take off once he started gaining more autonomy away from his father. So, did his father's parenting set him up for success when he became autonomous? I don't think so, because Joe was continuously trying to find ways to continue exploiting his artistry and his success and contain Michael's independence and agency as time goes on. I'm going to play a little clip for y'all. Listen up. I like to say this is our last and final tour. And I think this is our farewell tour. Y'all been wonderful. It's been a long 20 years, but we love you all. Woo. Here we go. Shake your body. Shake your body. So that was the final date of the Victory Tour with the Jacksons. So this is the last time Michael Jackson ever goes on tour with his brothers, and this was also depicted in the Michael biopic as one of the most pivotal moments where Michael declares his independence from his father. Now, I went and researched some lore about the Victory Tour, and apparently there were a lot of shady things that were going on about the Victory Tour when it came to ticket prices. I believe Joe Jackson also wanted to do like a world tour with the Jacksons, but this was Michael's way of declaring like, I'm done with this shit, bitch. Like I'm over this shit. Like I'm doing my own thing now. Like you no longer have any control over me. And it is kind of crazy to think that Michael never did a Thriller tour, because that would have been crazy. Like this was the tour that he went on during his Thriller era. But even the subtle things that Joe didn't have literal control over continue to affect Michael in different ways. So one of the things is that Michael Jackson is known to have gotten various cosmetic procedures. Apparently, one of Michael's desire to alter his appearance was because he did not want to look like his father. He claims that it was just the nose, because Joe Jackson specifically always made fun of his nose. That also seems like a common thing amongst the Jacksons as a whole. They all seem to have gotten nose procedures as they got older. Due to the family's religious background, it is also assumed that Michael did not move out from his parents' house. Granted, he did pay for the Havenhurst house in Encino before he moved to Neverland Ranch in 1988 when he was 30 years old. He was one of the second to last, I believe, to move out of the house. And I believe Latoya was the last one to move out of the house when she got married. They were very much raised conservative in that way. I would say Neverland Ranch became like a physical manifestation of Michael's desire to reclaim his childhood from this time period. that his father took away from him. I think Neverland Ranch is a symbol of Michael's unhealthy attachment to his childhood and potentially also fueled his unhealthy relationships with children as an adult. I'm not going to be talking about that. I do not want to get jumped in these comments, but I do think that his relationship with his father and the abuse that he had faced are all direct reflections of how he became as an adult. And you can tell because this family is so big, like it manifests in different ways. Even when you look at someone like Janet, she she also seems to have a very complex relationship with her father, and she said that she's never called him dad. He's always like, call me Joseph. And she, I believe, also fired. And just finishing off with some more points about Michael Jackson. His father was the first figure in his life, essentially, that would try to control, exploit, and financially take advantage of him. And he would continue to experience that throughout his life. And I think that's really interesting to think about. Like, the first person that ever truly hurt him and took advantage of him was his father. And that's all he continued experiencing throughout his life. Lisa Marie Presley had talked about that a lot in interviews talking about Michael, where the deterioration of their marriage had a lot to do with the enablers in Michael's life, and whether it was due to addiction or whether it was other people taking advantage of him, not having good intentions for him. It's very reflective of, even though he had such a toxic relationship with his father, he still kept people in his life that had like these similar qualities to him, which I think is really profound and something to think about. But yeah, all that to say, I think Joe Jackson is like the textbook stage parent type of guy. And I think each of the Jackson children navigated their childhoods and adulthoods differently when it came to their parental figures and their relationships to them, as well as their business relationship with their fathers as well. And like I said, Janet Jackson fired Joe as her manager in 1986. And not to mention, Janet Jackson also had a massive career after cutting ties with her father, and that says something. Like, if you really, really look at a lot of these people's careers, they start flying colors once they leave their abusive parents. Like, it's actually pretty crazy. Now, I want to switch it up a little bit and look at some counter cases. I think there are some examples of parents who allow their children's creativity to thrive, and we've seen that happen in the industry a lot. So first, I want to talk about Billie Eilish and her mom. They've always talked very fondly of each other throughout interviews and press and the public. Billie and Phineas were both homeschooled. That was a decision made by their parents because they wanted to give more creative freedom to their children. And I think it's also important to note that Billie's parents also have backgrounds in entertainment. So they were both working artists. So they were familiar with the industry, but also didn't necessarily like push that lifestyle onto their children. It just kind of happened for them because they fostered an environment where creativity could be explored. I also think Billie and Phineas navigate the entertainment industry in very different ways because Billie is like kind of the face and the artist, and Phineas is also kind of coming into his own as well as an artist, but he kind of worked more behind the scenes as a producer. And it also doesn't seem like their parents really have any sort of input in terms of how they continue to navigate their careers. I think it seems like they have a relationship where when Billie or Phineas come to them for certain advice or support, they'll give that to them, but they're not necessarily pushing anything onto them because they're allowing them to create their own path in their careers. While Billie has talked about her mother being a constant figure of support in her life, her mother does not directly manage her career or make business creative decisions for her. And I think this is just a good example of how parents can be actively engaging in their child's career in a supportive way without demanding control or calling the shots. But I still feel like her parents are a great case to look at when you want to see similar qualities of the stereotypical stage parent, but seeing how it manifests in a really great way where their children as artists can continue to thrive and also give them support for their success. And my second counter case I want to talk about, which I'm going to go in a little bit more in depth because there's a lot more lore here, and it's Beyonce and Solange. Now, Matthew Knowles is an interesting case study because I think his parenting style seems to be just miles apart when it comes to his children. So, Matthew was Beyonce's manager until 2011, starting from the beginnings of Destiny's Child. So, he was Beyonce's manager for like over 20 years. But later, there were allegations from Live Nation Entertainment accusing Matthew of stealing money from Beyonce after they had announced that they were officially cutting business ties. So let's look back. Earlier this year, Beyonce announced that she had severed professional ties with her father and manager, Matthew Knowles, a decision said to have been amicable. But in a lawsuit filed Monday, Knowles claimed he, in fact, had been terminated by his daughter and alleged that he had been fired after Live Nation Entertainment made claims that he had stolen money from her. Beyonce announced her separation from Knowles, who had guided her career since her teenage debut as lead singer of Destiny's Child. In the filing, the elder Knowles claimed that the concert conglomerate, which promoted the singer's past tours, had made false allegations about him to his daughter in hopes of gaining rights to promoting her 2011 world tour. In the petition, Knowles claimed that after failing to secure the rights to her world tour, Live Nation told her or members of the team that he had stolen money from Beyonce on her most recent tour or otherwise taken funds that he was not entitled to. So I don't know how this lawsuit ended up settling. Let's actually look that up. Okay, so it seems that he unsuccessfully sued Live Nation due to these accusations that they had spread false information about his business dealings with Beyonce. We don't really know how this ended up turning out for him. But honestly, there's been like a lot of lore throughout the years about Matthew Knowles and the way that he would manage Destiny's Child, the way he was managing Beyonce's career. Also, I just think with most artists, there just comes a time where when you mix family with business, there is a time where like shit just needs to end. Like it doesn't really last a very long time, and if it does, it's very rare. And more so than to talk about Matthew and Beyonce, I wanted to compare the way he managed Beyonce's career to Solange's career, actually. Matthew claims that he also wanted Solange to be a member of Destiny's Child, and she didn't end up doing so. I think she danced for Destiny's Child in the past. Like, she had a very conventional, like, career upbringing in the very beginnings of her career as well. Like, it was clear that they also wanted her to be, like, the next pop star, too. I think I have more of, like, a nuanced opinion about this. I do think while Solange's career in the beginning wasn't as successful as Beyonce, I also don't think that that's really what she wanted to begin with. So she declined to be a member of Destiny's Child, apparently, according to Matthew. And I think people make the assumption that because Beyonce is Beyonce and Solange doesn't have that type of career, that Matthew just took a back seat when it came to managing Solange's career. But I also don't think that's fully the case. Like I said, I think Solange always knew that she wanted to do something different outside of the family business of building Destiny's Child, Beyonce Incorporated, right? I also think that Solange and Beyonce are really good examples of how children can differently perceive the parenting and guidance that they receive. So, based on past interviews, it seems that Solange was always more outspoken and rebellious in terms of personality, and being given more creative range and freedom is really where she thrives. And I can just immediately see like Solange being like the younger rebellious sister. Like, if anything, if you try to contain or control her, like she lashes out even more. Like that, like I give that, like I'm that type of personality, and I can totally see Solange being that versus like Beyonce. Like when you instruct her on exactly what to do and how to do it, like she knows how to execute it perfectly. And this is also not to say that because Beyonce has always had like a huge team behind her that guides her in creating her art, that she's not as talented or anything like that, because I think Beyonce Incorporated is more manufactured, obviously, and I don't think that undermines her work, her actual creative integrity either. I really think it's more of like a difference in how people work best. I think it's a skill to be able to network and connect to the right people to help build the world that you want to create. And I think Solange and Beyonce have that in common, where they are great curators of a world that they want to build. But I think they just have different approaches to that. I think Beyonce takes the more conventional pop star approach to it, while Solange is more independent and free range. Also, I think a big discrepancy to note as well is that Solange also just had a wildly different life circumstance where it wasn't possible to follow her sister's footsteps, even if she wanted to, because she had her son at a very young age. She also had issues with her record label and she had some pushback in the music industry. Like, she has actively spoken out about those things in the past. So I think she had definitely a more like unconventional path, but I think it ended up with her really thriving. I also think industry and corporate politics is much more complex than people assume. I think just because Matthew Knowles had more business acumen and was better prepared to connect with the right people to bolster his daughter's careers, that kind of acumen also doesn't mean that they have control over everything. So I think Solange specifically, like having to navigate her career in such a different, unconventional way compared to Beyonce, like I think that says something. And I don't think that necessarily means that Matthew was just poorly managing Solange. I mean, it could be, that could be a possibility, but I don't think, like, I just don't believe that that's like the sole factor as to why Solange's career ended up the way it did. So those were the counter cases. And now I want to talk about Britney Spears, because I don't think we could do a episode on stage parents without talking about Britney Spears. I think Britney Spears is such a cautionary tale, but also something that we really need to look at when it comes to a person's rights just being violated and completely taken away. I think Britney Spears' case is so deeply saddening because she is the prime example where you can see that a parent who did not care to love or support their child in any way, shape, or form will then come back when there is an opportunity where the parent can be looked at as the savior by the public, the parent who stepped up, but will even go through legal hoops to gain all control and power over a human being, let alone their child. Just I'm not gonna go super in depth into Britney Spears' conservatorship, but you guys, if you haven't done your research or like done any, like watched any deep dives on it, I urge you to do so, because this was truly like an issue of human rights violations. Like, truly, Britney Spears, all she did was work her entire life. Like, that's all she knew what to do, is to work. And the fact that we're seeing her now, she's been struggling mentally even after the conservatorship. Like, that is the result of only being forced to work your entire life. Like, we're not gonna get the comeback Britney anymore. Like, I just think that's past, because there there was just so much neglect when it came to this entire situation. And I think Britney is just like the textbook definition of being a child star and being brought up becoming the primary breadwinner in her family. Her mother constantly taking her to auditions from the age of 5. And Britney's mother, Lynn Spears, was not directly her manager at any point in her career, nor did it really seem like she was super controlling. But I do think her mother specifically aligns more similarly to like Justin Bieber's parents or Aaron Carter's parents or Lindsay Lohan, where they are neglectful and they allow the industry to exploit their children. And Britney was like just not protected. I think it's also important to note that Lynn Spears, her mother, also released a book around 2008, a year after Britney's infamous public breakdown. And like, obviously, looking back, we can be like, yeah, that was clearly like a cash grab to profit off of her daughter's like mental breakdown. I think that's just so dark. Just like, her story is so sad, and I feel like people seem so desensitized to it. Like, I don't think people, or maybe it's just because the newer generation doesn't care about Britney as much because they didn't grow up with her. I didn't grow up with like prime Britney. I remember the first time I really remember seeing Britney was like post conservatorship, because I'm Gen Z. But like, I just think her story is so important, and I feel like it kind of gets moneyed up in the rest of the internet discourse and online press cycle that, like, I feel like people don't give a fuck about Britney Spears anymore because after the whole Free Britney movement and like she's not healed, like people are just like, oh, there's just like no hope. Like Britney's just like done. And it's just so sad because like this is a product of people being so neglectful and like no one in her circle ever protecting her. Okay, so once the conservatorship began in 2007 or 8, I believe, that is when her father became an active figure in her life. He was like very much absent during her childhood and adolescence. Apparently he was like an alcoholic and he was not like a present father at all. But then this is when he becomes an active figure in her life. And I think when I hear Britney fans talking about this time period, they said that they thought it was like a sign of hope that like Jamie Spears, her father, is going to be like the parent who stepped up now and is finally going to be able to help her navigate her life and be the parent that he's supposed to be. But obviously, looking back now, we can see how people should have taken it as a red flag because why would an absent father choose to step in at one of the lowest points in his daughter's life? Now that a conservatorship, a legal arrangement that would allow an adult to pretty much manage every single aspect of his extremely successful daughter's life, career, finances, like it was just a recipe for disaster. And also, Britney Spears grew up very poor. So obviously her parents were not the best with money. So she was just constantly making money for everyone around her and she was constantly being exploited. So again, I'm not going to go deep into Britney's affairs and the issues surrounding her conservatorship because we would definitely be here forever. But I think it's just really important to emphasize where Britney is now is like the ultimate testament of how abuse and control does not let creativity and artistry thrive. Like when I hear people talking about like what would have happened if Britney did X, Y, or Z, and like how differently things would have turned out if certain circumstances were to have happened in Britney's career. And I think Britney, what's so sad about her is I think it's not like she didn't want to do the work. It's not like she was just like, fuck this. Like, okay, she did say fuck this in 2007, but that was because they did not let her have an ounce of peace. Like, they did not let her do anything. Like, she was constantly, she did not catch a break. So obviously, she was just going to retaliate. And then it just ended up with people sinking their claws into her more to the point where she literally could not do anything. She couldn't even buy a cup of coffee for herself. She could not like use her phone with her own free will without being monitored. Like that is insane for someone to be under that type of control when they don't like I think allegedly her conservatorship lied about her having like dementia or something because usually conservatorships are for dementia patients, someone who physically and mentally is not stable enough to control certain aspects of their actual life. Someone else, like a third party, can do it for them. But Britney Spears was literally just like the conservatorship was just a tool for her to be absolutely abused. And Britney was never allowed to not work. Like, if you really think about it, all she did her entire life before 2023 was work. That's all she did. That's all she ever did. She is the perfect example of never having any type of work life balance. And now that she doesn't have to work at all, she doesn't have the resources to navigate her life in a healthy way. She literally doesn't have anyone in her life. And I really, really hope, I think she went to rehab recently. I really, really hope she met someone that is able to provide her some type of guidance. I hope she's still able to see her children. But if you really look at her life and the way that she was exploited and abused, it's sort of like, how the fuck was she supposed to ever turn out normal? Like, she just couldn't because of the way that people treated her in her entire life and career. I think Britney brings out a specific emotion because I think Britney, Michael, and Justin bring out specific emotions for a lot of people because those three stars, I would say, arguably, are the ones that had absolutely no boundaries when it came to like paparazzi and press and people speculating about their personal lives and just everything about them being under a microscope. And they started to work at such young ages, and they also came from poor backgrounds where they were the primary breadwinner. So everything like depended on them from such a young age, and they all have so many things to dissect in their life because of the ways that they were just not protected. But they're also so incredibly talented. Like all of them, all three of them are also very much prodigies. Like they were all so insanely gifted. And those things were just completely exploited and taken away from them. But even Britney, I just hope that she's able to live the rest of her life. She's like 40, I believe, or 40 something. But like I would honestly say 480 is still really young. Like, obviously, she probably is not going to come back to the music industry. And I hope she doesn't because I really don't want her to be, like, susceptible to that kind of abuse again. But, like, I hope she lives, like, a really long, healthy life and she's able to, like, find happiness because she truly, like, I hope she's able to take the money that she got from her catalog and, like, truly just, like, spend it on her kids, find healthier ways to navigate her life and like meet good friends. And I just really want like a better life for this woman. And it's just so sad to see how broken she is and it seems like no one cares. Like it like sometimes I'm not even like a Britney stan or anything, but genuinely it's like screaming out into the ether when talking about Britney Spears cuz it's like how is no one helping this woman? Like she's one of the biggest pop stars in the world and just like no one cares about her well-being. Like it's crazy. Okay, I need to move on or else like this is just going to be like I could talk about Britney all day. Okay, so this is the final case study that I want to talk about and I wanted to end with this because I think we can ask a lot of questions along the way to end the episode. There's a lot of open-ended questions when it comes to Kris Jenner. The Kardashians are always at the scene of the damn crime. So I would say that Kris is not the typical trope of the stage parent, and she's been able to distance herself from that image, and I think that's very calculated. Especially as her daughters have gotten older, and like her daughters are also having kids and things like that. I think it's very clear that she still uses her daughters as a shield when it comes to the discussion of exploiting her children. I think because her daughters are essentially her publicists, they get the brunt of the criticism so that she doesn't have to. I would be correct in saying that, right? Like, I don't think that's a hot take. She is like the stage parent's dream life. Like, she is the stage parent final boss because she can avoid accountability when it comes to her children's issues, especially now that they're adults because they kind of have to take accountability for themselves and their lives while also promoting like the capitalist dream of building a family empire. Like, she literally has multiple streams of incomes through every single one of her daughters, right? And son, I guess, if the sock line is doing anything. Hey, shout out Arthur George. And she's also building like her own personal brand when leaning into the public's narrative and commentary around her. Like Kris Jenner loves leaning into the memes. Like all the like ditzy shit that she does on the show, like it helps like build the facade that she is just like this fun, loving mother who is so funny and just like having a kiki with her kids all the time. And we're not thinking about the fact that she literally exploits her children all the time. So I don't know. And I think what's also interesting about the Kardashians as a whole is that they've moved past from being just seen as trashy reality stars, but because their reality TV background is so pertinent to their branding, like they still have the show and they're still doing like little bits that still make them feel like relatable and approachable. um they can easily fall back into just like the ditzy like, oh, we don't really know anything, we're just like reality stars, when it comes to actually having serious conversations around the family's problematic history. And I think it's something to think about when you look at how the women in the family are groomed in a sense to become a certain face and a certain product to be sold to the masses while the men in their lives, the men in their family continue to stay protected. I've done a TikTok series called The Male Centered Matriarchy about the Kardashians specifically. If you'd like to see me dive a little deeper into that, you can go check out my TikTok. Yeah, I think Kris Jenner is every stage parent's dream. Like, that's the life that they want to live. Have a bunch of kids. All of them are making money for her, but the public still likes her enough where all the criticism just goes to the kids and not her. It leaves a lot of open-ended questions, like how much of your kids like accepting that behavior or condoning that behavior allows you to get away with it, because like the way Kim and Kylie, and like actually not even just Kim and Kylie, even Kendall and Chloe, like the ones that seemingly did have complex relationships with Kris in the past, they still talk about her in such a loving way now, and they end up getting the brunt of the criticism because they still want to protect their mom. I just think that's crazy. I think that system in which Kris Jenner built, like, touche Kris Jenner. Like, that's all I can say. But yeah, I guess that's where I want to end the episode. I mean, I think it's very clear that abuse is not something that makes legends and geniuses thrive. I think that's a narrative that we really need to stop pushing. I think we've kind of stopped pushing it at this point, which is good, but I still see, rather than it being like stage parents are no longer a thing, because they definitely still are, I think there's just different ways in which they navigate it and hide it better. And I think Kris Jenner perhaps created a dangerous precedent. And I'm curious to see how this will continue to evolve in the future with pop culture. I mean, we didn't even talk about influencer moms. We didn't even talk about Charlie D'Amelio. There was like recent news about her cutting ties with her family because of financial issues and stuff like that. Like, that's really the new generation that clearly it hasn't gotten any better. Like, it's just manifesting in different forms at this point. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you guys so much for waiting this past month. I'm really, really excited to be continuing this. And I will see you guys next week.